Hello again everybody and welcome back to Fujit's Blitz with me, Fujit. Hello. Today we're going to be looking at building this bad boy, the 1/12 scale Boba Fett from Bandai, a kit I've been really looking forward to. So let's get the box open and see what's inside. You get pretty detailed instructions. I'm liking Bandai's instructions, to be fair. Pretty nicely detailed. Gives you a good painting guide at the end as well. The kit is a toy, effectively, but it is a model toy. So it already comes kind of painted. It's not paint, it's the way they've molded the plastic. You get a couple of slides. You get this one, which is decals. That's the water slide decals. And you also get stickers, because after all, it's a kit. And as you can see, the kit itself, pretty well detailed, although the zoom took its time there. And as I said, it already comes in pre-coloured plastic. So if you want to build this as a kiddie, then it's pretty straightforward stuff. You don't need any glue. You really don't need any paint. You will still get a relatively good Boba Fett representation. As you can see on the kit sprues, there's everything you need to build a Boba Fett. And there's the water slide decals. Again, the zoom just doesn't want to kick in there. So that's what's in the box. Pretty funky stuff. And I picked this kit up for, I can't remember how much it was now. So let's start with the build. Now I'm not going to go through the full build. It's pretty straightforward stuff. It's just follow the instructions and put it all together. There's no point me sitting here showing you how to build a Boba Fett, because you're all capable of reading and following the instructions. It's as simple as that. There is nothing complex in this kit. If there was anything complex, then I would obviously show you that. But it really is straightforward. Follow the instructions, and that is it. If you want to build a good, proper representation, then there's a little bit of cleanup, like most model kits. But the flash marks and the cleanup on these kits is pretty good, to be honest with you. And the engineering is so flush that when you put it together, there isn't that many problems that you need to sort out. There are a couple, not going to lie, because nothing is perfect. But compared to some of the model kits out there, this one is pretty funky. So as you can see, it's all snapped together, goes together pretty easily. And that's straightforward. It's like that throughout the whole of the kit. It really is a dream to build. As I said, there's a little bit of cleanup. Nothing that's really going to cause you any concerns or problems. And this is why I love these Bandai kits. I mean, the engineering is fantastic. The build itself is just so simple, straightforward and easy. I make it a little bit harder because I'm not building a model here. I'm not building a toy. I want a pretty good representation of Boba Fett. Now, I go a little bit over the top with the painting, but that's because I want a pretty good looking painted artistic type of model. So you can get away with basic paint job, but I'm not going to do that. And as you can see, it goes together pretty straightforward. Everything is fitting together nicely, and it's just a dream to build. So let's get into the painting, but I just want to show you here. I break the components up into its various constituent parts. This, for me, is just because it's going to make it easier for me to paint. There are so many different colours on Boba Fett. As I said, there is a little bit of cleanup and there is a little bit of a problem. So I'm going to get out my Vallejo plastic putty. This is an acrylic-based putty. It's really easy to use. You just plough it on like this. And once it's not dry, don't let it set. Just run it down the seam line, and then take a cotton bud or something similar, dip it in a bit of water, just normal tap water, and then rub it away. And it all just goes into the grooves nicely, and it sorts it out perfectly. And you won't see those seam lines once it's painted. Moving on to the painting stage, which is coming up. I'm just showing you the end of the seam lines here. We're going to blast it with Mr. Hobby Brown. The reason brown is because it's a figure. And normally I would use black, but I've almost run out of black. But because this is a figure, I want to use brown anyway, because all his body, effectively, apart from the armor, is a grey colour, various shades of grey. And what I want with the brown, firstly I want to even it up with the primer, but then secondly I want to get some of those shadows in there coming out when I do the next stage. The next stage will just be layering it all over. But first I've got to blast everything with this brown, and I mean everything. So as I said, I've broken the entire model down into its constituent parts just for ease of painting. And I'm just going to blast them all with brown primer from Mr. Hobby, which is pretty easy to use, to be honest with you. You just need to get the thinning ratios. Now I generally find that it's about 80% thinner to 20% of paint. That works for me. It may not work for you. Once I've done that, I'm going to load the airbrush up with some pure white, flat white, and then from the top I'm going to try and get the highlights. This is the proprietary painting. I'm not going to paint in white. This is just to highlight, pick up those highlights. So I'm spraying in from top down, and it will just pick up the raised areas. It'll help me later. And, you know, that's all that's there to do. It's just a guide for when I'm actually doing the painting. And this is, again, just Mr. Hobby flat white. We then move to the main start of the painting. Now, I'm using here Tamiya Ghost Grey in its lacquer range. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pick out the shadows. Now, this is the dark Ghost Grey. And all I'm going to do is pick out the shadows. I've already done the highlights. We've already got those deep shadows from the primer. So this is just filling in with the darkest of the greys that I'm going to be using on this figure, those areas that really require some deeper shadow. Because it is a greyish colour. Now, as I said, it's numerous greys, but this is the darkest of the greys that we're going to use. And as you can see, it's just going over slowly, picking up those really deep shadows. Nothing else. He's not being blasted completely, not painting him fully dark ghost grey. I'm just getting into those shadowy areas and leaving the highlight areas. And that's the point here, because we're going to build it up. And as you can see here, we're starting to build up those shadows here just on the legs. And it's nothing, you know, I've got the airbrush at quite a low pressure, and I've got the nozzle turned all the way down, and all I'm doing is leaving those areas that are going to be lighter for later painting, and just really getting into those deep crevices and dark shadowy points. Do the same on the upper torso, although this is a completely different grey. It's a sky grey is the end colour, but we're not going to get into that just yet. I still want to get those dark shadows in there in all those seam lines. And it's you know, once you get used to the technique, it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple to do. It's just picking out those shadow areas where it is going to have shadow. By all means, keep looking at the lighting. You know, keep having a look at where the shadows are forming. Don't just look at where the creases are. Once I've done that, I'm then going to load it up with Ghost Grey. This is the light Ghost Grey. Now I'm going to pick out the highlights, which is going to be the majority of the figure. And again, I've got the pressure set really low and the nozzle turned all the way down. Gives me more control in the airbrush, allowing me to pick out those highlighted areas. And I didn't know this, but Boba Fett in the movie, his uniform is different to his jacket. So his uniform is like a ghostish grey colour, where his jacket is a sky grey. It's a lot lighter. But that, you know, the thing is, it's all grey. So you've got to try and pick out some subtle highlights and things here. And that's all I'm doing with this light ghost grey. And what I'll do later, I will add a little bit of white to this mix to get it even lighter, to pick out the proper shadows. Because this is effectively his overall colour, not just the highlights. This light ghost grey is the overall colour is your uniform. We've already got the dark ghost grey as the shadows, and this is really the main uniform. Again, don't forget the torso. Got to get up there, got to do the torso, got to pick out those bits and bobs, and try and get it uniformed. There's nothing worse than trying to do lights and shadows on a figure and completely fluffing it so you've got contrast rather than you've got to blend it nicely. Now I'm doing the whole of this figure realistically with an airbrush because he's big enough to do that. If I was doing a 1/35th scale figure, which is what I normally do, then there's no way I could do all of it with an airbrush. I have to sort of crack out the paintbrushes. But even on this one, I have to crack out the paintbrushes. Once that's put aside to dry, I'm going to go back to the armor and I'm going to base it with a silver. The reason being, I want to chip it. I'm going to add some chipping fluid, which unfortunately I didn't show in the video. I forgot to film that. I'm just going to add some MIG chipping fluid and then chip it once I've put the green armor on the top, the paint color of the armor, that is. And this just allows me to do that. Now I'm going to go back to the jacket. So this is a different color again. What I'm doing here, I'm lightening the original color, adding a bit more highlights before I blast it with a very light sky gray to get that contrast between the jacket and the overall uniform itself. Again, I'm focusing on the raised areas where the highlights would be. This is actually going to be his actual color, so I'm not just focusing in little bits because those will be highlighted at a later date, but I am trying to get that contrast and that nice blend coming through. And that's all I'm trying to achieve here. And as you can see, the paint's getting lighter and lighter to this sky grey colour to allow the contrast between his uniform and his jacket. And there is a big difference in the uniform and the jacket I noticed when I was looking at the publicity shoots of Boba Fett. And his jacket really is, this is what the armour sits on, his jacket really is a very light grey compared to the rest of his uniform, which is a darkish grey. Although if you look at the new Book of Boba Fett series, he seems to be wearing light grey all over. That's not the case in the original Empire Strikes Back film. His uniform is a ghostish grey. It's like a blue grey, whereas the jacket is a very light, subtle grey. There is a hint of blue in it, but it's a very subtle light grey compared to his actual uniform. And that's all I'm trying to do here. And as you can start to see the contrast between the uniform and the jacket starting to come through, where the uniform has got that hue of blue and the jacket no longer has that. Now, put that aside, I can spray those areas that are going to be brown leather. All the descriptions of the paints are down below, by the way. So I'm just going to blast it with the brown leather. I've already highlighted it, base coated it, primed it, and then highlighted it to pick up those highlights. I'm going to do the same thing with the bout. Again, it's already been highlighted with the white. Now I'm just using a thinner paint just to get that leather look. Once I've done that, I do the bottom part in a very dark brown. It really is like a very dark brown. It's still brown, but it's a very dark brown. And again, it's incredibly thin paint this. It's 90% thinner. Then I'm going to move on to the yellow parts. This is a mixture of two different paints. It's not pure yellow. Again, the descriptions are below. And as you can see, all I'm going to do, I've already pre-painted it in the silver and put the chipping fluid on, just blasting it with the yellow, so it'll allow me to chip it later. And it's a beautiful yellow colour, to be honest with you. And I do that on all the yellow parts. There's only 4, so it's not much of a trauma. It was a bit of a pain mixing the paint because you're only going to use a little bit of it. But hey, if you just use a straightforward yellow, you're not going to get a realistic look to your Boba Fett. So you've really got to mix that yellow and that cream yellow to get the proper yellow that you see in the movie. Once I've done that, I then crack out the wet palette. I get a very, very light brown from Vallejo, and I start just picking out some of the worn areas of the leather. So I've already got the base coat of leather. Now I'm just picking out the worn areas of the leather. And then what that'll achieve is it will give this like a realistic lived-in leather type look. And it's a very thin paint that I'm using here from Vallejo, and it's actually earth brown, which gives a great contrast to the red leather that I've already got. What I will then do afterwards, I will then overemphasize it with this saddle red. which is incredibly thin. I mean, it's almost like a wash. So I've already got the details in there. I've already done the chipping for the leather. Now I'm just like going to add this wash, which sort of it sort of highlights the, it tones down, but also at the same time highlights the sort of leather effect that I'm going for. And it's a very simple technique. You've just got to make sure it's, you know, the paint is thin enough. And a couple of passes and it will look fantastic. As you see here, you know, you just need to do a couple of passes and it ties it all together. And it really does look like it's a bit of worn leather. It's a great little technique once you get used to it. And I do it quite a lot, especially on a lot of leather goods, because leather gets chipped and scratched. And, you know, once you've done that, once you've got it all tied up, it will look quite authentic for the bout. And that's all I'm doing. And I will do the same thing for the dark part of the bout as well. And that's it. You know, once the water dries, it will look fantastic. Moving back to the torso, now this is where I crack out the paintbrushes again. And I'm going to use Vallejo Sky Grey here. And I'm just going to pick out highlight areas and blend it all together, blend it with the original base coat. So now we've got some shadow, we've got the original, we've got the main color. Now I'm picking out those highlights, which is a sky gray mixed with a little drop of white. And again, incredibly thin, hardly any paint on the brush, mostly watered down. So it allows me to blend it in nicely to really get some contrast without having these sort of tide lines that you get. It's a similar technique, similar to what I did on the leather bout, but this time there's no chipping that I'm overdoing. I'm just highlighting the highlights here. Then, you know, it's a question of putting the guy together. Realistically, this is the initial paint job. You know, this is only part one. Part two, we go into a bit more depth, where we look at, you know, some more intricate paint work. It's mainly going to be brush painting. There's going to be hardly any airbrushing, and you know, this is when I start cracking out the glue, gluing bits and bobs together. And as you can see, the Boba Fett here, he's pretty straightforward. You know, this I haven't done the arms, I haven't done the helmet or the head, I haven't done the jetpack. This is just what he looks like now, and you can see there's some contrast there, there's some highlights, some tones, some shadows. I'm going to put the armor on. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any decent footage of the chipping, but it's pretty straightforward. Add the chipping solution and away you go. And stick it all together. And at the end of this video, we have this. A half-completed Boba Fett. This is, you know, the main paint job is done. In the next episode, we'll go into a lot more detail. In the final episode, we'll do the weathering and the finishing. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. That's been my Boba Fett. I've been Fujit. By all means, comment in everything below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this build. And hopefully I will get part 2 up same time next week. And then part 3 a week later. Until then, guys, I look forward to hearing your comments. And hopefully you'll join me again in the next episode. Until then, all the best. Bye for now.